student learning. I'm also learning with all of you guys. Thank you so much. Those were some kind and big words. I hope I can do justice to this workshop today. First of all, I want to ask if I'm completely audible.
Yes, Sam, you're audible.
Okay, so I feel like I'll turn on my video. I don't have a problem with that. So yes, hello everyone. It's good to be here. Thank you so much, Team Legiloom, for inviting me. I guess it's good if we just straight dive in. One thing before I begin with is that how I will be structuring my session is we'll be understanding a few things about how a good research sort of binds you with a good first draft, and then maybe a second draft or the final draft that is completely a mooter's choice. So we'll leave it at that. But essentially, three breaking segments. That is your research, your first draft, your final draft. So before I begin, well, research in itself is actually a different workshop altogether. So we'll let that. We won't dive into that much deep. But I always begin by telling my kids here that research and the way you do it, I mean, I really want to convey it out that research has to be done structurally as well, because it then ties into how your structural skeleton of your arguments is framed, and then post that how you are then diving in your arguments and how you're sort of making that link. Now for an example, I'll just take 2-3 minutes for explaining what I mean by this is let's think of if there's some. Let's imagine the issue is regarding defamation. The issue goes like whether the statements made were defamatory in nature. Simple AF. Okay. So now defamatory in nature. What you would be obviously research is one first point is to at least understand what defamation is in a very broader context. So you go about doing a random Google search, random research on what defamation is, what constitutes it. Now, here is where, post this initial research, the second portion is where the structure comes into place. And what is the structure that I'm talking about? So, the structure is that once you have understood that something regarding defamation exists, and I have been asked to draft an argument on this issue, you go about dividing it. Once you do a basic research, you'll start understanding that within defamation, there are particular ingredients, exceptions. Break it down. You'll obviously have some commentary. If it's an ILAW problem, then if it's an international criminal law problem, I'm so sorry, there's some disturbance around. My campus is a monkey infested place, so just bear with me for a moment. I think it's sorted. Yeah, so defamation. So we all, as I mean, I'm assuming having done tort law, we do know that defamation consists of some ingredients that, it has to be public, it does not have to be true, it has to be false, it needs to, it needs to be malicious in nature, it needs to maybe cause you actual reputational harm in the public's eyes. So these are all ingredients. Now, how you go about making your first structural skeleton for the first draft, I generally recommend kids whenever I'm coaching them that do keep your initial research, start doing your initial research ka timeline for max maybe 6 to 7 days, because post that there's something called a writer's halt that will eventually also come into place when you're writing a memorial. वो memorial लिखते लिखते भी that halt comes into place, that after which you have no clue where to go about. So it's good to start on jotting down a structural skeleton. Coming back to our example of, if some statements constitute defamation or not. So let's go now how we'll be structuring this particular issue within the entire memorial is issue 4, go about, then A, argument A. The following statements are not defamatory because all the ingredients of are defamatory because all the ingredients are satisfied. Then within it, A.1, they were made in public. B, someone heard them. C, they were malicious. D, any other ingredient within defamation that has to be satisfied. So now what you have is a very clear set structure coming from your research, because your research was very solid. You made a good skeleton here. Now A was with regards to satisfying the ingredients. Now your argument B within this issue can be maybe exceptions, that these statements do not fall under the truth exception that exists within defamation, that no, these statements are not truthful, you use the facts to justify that. that forms your crux here, and then maybe any inarguendo if it can be added. I'll elaborate on an inarguendo. One thing that I do not know is what is the composition of the people that I'm talking to. So I'm not aware if you guys are first years, if you guys are in your final years. So bear with me if I start explaining basics or start going too much into basics. So just bear with me on that. Yes, so I think I'm done with my first segment that I was talking about. That a good structured research flows into your first stage. That is called a skeleton drafting. How do you go about doing a skeleton drafting? All of this till now, I was talking about the arguments advanced section of a moot memorial. For anyone who is not aware, there are multiple components within a moot memoranda or a moot memorial. For that, I will be sharing my screen. I have some PPT ready for you guys, so I hope that helps. So give me a minute. Yeah, here's the PPT. So is my screen visible to you? Okay, great. Thank you so much. For that, I will then turn on the presenters mode. You know what? Never mind. Let's just not turn on the presenters mode. Yeah. So, what is a memorial memorandum? This is a futile question to be asking. We already know what that is. But one thing about a memorial memoranda comes from any moot before you start even researching for it. Do download sample memos existing either on the websites. For international moots, it majorly exists on the websites, but for national moots, maybe talk to seniors. LinkedIn is a great platform for conversing with other colleges. Take out your sample memos, go through them, so you at least know the weightage. Also, in every memorial, the marking, what we call the score sheet of a memorial, matters a lot. So for example, in some memorials, authorities are given quite much more priority in the other ones. What I mean by this is, so for example, some moot rule book could be like that you have to extensively rely on authorities. So you know that any line, majority of the lines in my moot memo needs to be covered by citations, needs to be covered by authorities. To be fair, that's a very general rule as well. But for example, if somewhere it's the authorities are not paid that much used to, this happens especially in ICL, or I would say IHL moods more, international humanitarian law moods more, because having judgments that fit exactly on you are not there. B, majority of the judgments are not binding when it comes to international law. So you have to rely a lot on scholarly articles. So even the type of authorities that you are relying on depends on the nature of the moot that you're doing. So, but yes, there always exists a general rule. So I'll be going through the general rule for all of you. Yeah, so what is a memorial? What's a memorandum? What are the components of a memorial? You guys can take a screenshot of this. This is something very basic. You start off with a cover page. A cover page is, again, that's why I said borrow a sample memorial, because there's no particularly set format. The ideal thing that we know is, okay, blue for petitioners, red for respondents, that's it. But along with that, there's also certain ways how you structure it. A cover page, cover page may, in the matter of where is it going to be placed, is it going to be up, is it going to be low. So all of that again matters on a sample memo from the moot that you're doing, preferably a latest edition. A cover page includes the party's name, before which forum this entire matter is lying, and from which side this memorial is being made. Is it the petitioners? Is it the respondents? Also, it includes your team name, and it's ideally blue or red in nature. But as far as I remember, some moots in India do not want these colored segregations of blue and red, so sometimes it's just plain white, plain boring white. So moving ahead, what is your table of abbreviations? I think we all know that. Table of one thing, So one thing with regards to abbreviations within your advanced arguments wala segment, is that wherever you define a term. Now, what do I mean by defining a term? So kindly pay attention to your screen. Whenever I say defining a term, so for example, in the list of abbreviations, very quick example, IT rules. If somewhere in your memo you're referring to IT rules, you're obviously going to put them in the list of abbreviations, ki IT, information technology, or ITR, information technology rules. Now, what I wanted to tell all of you is that just doing merely this does not give you the green pass to start using ITR in the first line of your memo itself. What I mean by it is, once you have put these abbreviations in your list of abbreviation, in your advanced arguments ka written section, you have to define it for the first time wherever it is used. Post that, you can start using the abbreviation continuously. Why is it done? So that the judge looks at it and no judge is going to be doing the back and forth. कि no judge will be skipping from your advanced argument section to your list of abbreviations again and again to see, अच्छा ये ITR लिखा है, इसका क्या मतलब है? अच्छा ये ITA लिखा है, what does that mean? So for a judge to have these abbreviations refreshed in his memory, what you do is assume that there's some para that under section 67A, I don't know, whatever section. Now let's not do that. Next, section 61 of the ITR. Now, this is not how we leave it. Imagine this to be the first segments of any issue. This can be with regards to anywhere where you use the abbreviation for the first time, anywhere in your memo. Even if it's the last page of your arguments advanced and you're using the said abbreviation for the first time, this is how we say that you define it. Put a bracket, put a comma, say here and after. I'm so sorry, it's the reverse. So here you'll write the full form. Outside the bracket, full form, information technology rules 21 for that matter, and then within the bracket, hereinafter ITR, and you put this into brackets, you close the bracket, and then you bold it out in your moot memorial. This helps the judge really be streamlined with the abbreviations, because it's not as easy. ITR, someone can be confused with income tax, so there are multiple other terminologies that judges get confused with. So it's easier to sort of incorporate this in your draft only for the first time wherever the abbreviation is mentioned. Post that, use ITR through and through. Use it 10 times, 100 times, doesn't matter. So yes, that was one tip I wanted to share with you. Many of my juniors falter here, and I myself was in my first moot was asked a lot about certain definitions that I forgot to highlight, explain in my memo. So this is something I also learned in my time. Yeah, moving on to index of authorities. So you can make your index of authorities A automatically, B manually. Manual looks prettier. Manual is heavy to do, but it's generally recommended to do manually, because the automatic one, you have to wait post completing the entire memo, and I feel it's a very horrible experience. I just hate doing that, selecting the entire thing, going to the citation wala thing, loading it down, segregating it. It seems easier, but then it's harder if you change anything. So a good way to go about it is, it takes time. It takes around, the best researcher in my college, whom I have done a few moots with, she takes around 1.5 hours to do a manual index of authorities, but that comes with experience. So max 2 to 3 hours. How is a manual index of authorities done? It's basically you make the table and then you start copying the citations, putting it there and the page number. That's it. Yes, it's manual book. So I recommend making that because it looks prettier, it looks neater. You can edit it later. But then if you want to go about with a automatic one, it's also good and well and good. Now, an index of authority should always be consisting of Indian cases, foreign cases, if any. If it's a national mood, sometimes you won't get foreign cases, but recommended hota hai ki you do put them. Indian cases, foreign cases, then you have your constitutional articles, statutes, then there's journal articles, reports, books. Like, this is sort of the order that we follow when talking about an index of authority. So yeah, this is the general rule, but then otherwise, obviously, it always depends on the type of mood that you're doing. So majorly what we recommend is, when a judge is going through your memorial and marking you in an index of authorities, the guy always will try to see that you have at least used all these sources. These all constitute of primary and secondary sources for a memorial. So what a judge wants is, he wants at least all of these to be covered. So what we do is, again, this is a weird trick, that it's very possible that you did not use any books or commentaries. It's very possible, because most of us rely on judgments. We're like, defamation ki to itni easy definition hai, isko kya hi define karenge, we'll just let it be. We'll just cite a judgment for it, for defining defamation. So one thing we do post our memos are done is that we take out these commentaries or books ताकि हमारा index of authority seems stable and filled in. None of these segments, major segments, should be empty, so that it looks like your research base was very heavy and you have gone through it in its entirety. These are very minute things, but they make a huge role when it comes to वो best second best memo का वो जो एक difference होता है ना जहाँ पे वो award दे दिया जाता है. This is the only difference that where it makes the difference, because somewhere on the line a person who has been a semi-finalist also has the same quality of a memo that a finalist has. The things that grant even a quarter finalist a best memo is this. Yeah, this is index of authority. Statement of jurisdiction, I'll just quickly go through this. A statement of jurisdiction, essentially before which court and why is your court lying. Those of us who have done, very easier to grasp this concept. Those of us who haven't, it's basically if your locus is coming in from sort of jurisdiction. As we know, there's original jurisdiction, there's advisory, there's appellate, there's, when it comes to Supreme Court, there's also the SLP 136. If it's Competition Act, then it's some statutory principle that includes the jurisdiction wala element. If it's IBC, then it's different. So again, always depends on the type of moot that you are doing. If it's a writ petition, obviously 32. I will not be delving much into the statement of jurisdiction thing. What is a writ jurisdiction? We know what is a writ jurisdiction. It includes the 5 writs. It lies against the state. Article 2 to 6 also exists for writs that lie in the High Court. So just not stating the obvious and moving ahead. If you have any questions with regarding to this segment that I'm quickly going over, just note it down. We'll do it. We'll cover it post the session. So yeah, let's just move forward. This is, yes, a statement of jurisdiction drafted by us in a, oh no, this was done by one of my friends. So this was a competition law moot that they were doing. And as you can see, not just the 3-4 lines that exist, but also pasting in the section. Again, aesthetics plays a huge role in getting you those extra 0.5, 0.2 marks. So if you have the section pasted out, it looks neat, it looks pretty, and it looks like you have not wasted a page, because a statement of jurisdiction is supposed to be 1 page, and 4 lines mein the page does not end. So just a suggestion, you can add the sections if you want to. It looks neat. That's it. Moving to your statement of facts. One key point about statement of facts is that whenever you are writing your statement of facts, do note which side you're writing them from. You will be you might think that a statement of facts, it's supposed to be neutral, but no, it's not. It's supposed to be neutral. You're not supposed to be misrepresenting, but then every moot problem has certain facts that when highlighted help one side, and when not highlighted as much help the other side. So for example, if there's a international maritime law issue and you get to know that the owners had done a security check, but they also had the clause to also, I mean, there might be a clause which says that if the owners had also within the security check done this, then this entire incident might have been prevented and it would not be the owner's liability. So as an owner, my goal would not be to excessively highlight this aspect from the statement of facts. I would be like, yes, the security check was done, there was a security clearance, nothing was found on the ship, and maybe passingly refer it. You do have to mention facts that are against you, but what I mean to say is that try not highlighting them. Try even presenting the statement of facts in a way that is helping you build your case. So again, any doubts with regards to this, you can talk to me in the Q&A session. I understand, which are important and relevant for you. One thing is also that not everything in a moot proposition is relevant. Not all facts in a moot proposition are relevant. Some of them exist just to confuse you. The drafters have put them there so that you get muddled up. So identifying them in itself is a task wherein you use the help of seniors, you use mind brainstorming, sitting with your team. So that is something. Yeah, a statement of facts majorly has a page limit. So that is also something that you have to craftily draft it in a way where you can show facts that support you, but then at the same time not misrepresent, but help in building up your case. वो एक narrative it Statement of facts helps to set a narrative in the judge's mind कि अच्छा ये हुआ था and अब मैं argue कर रहा हूँ. Again, never misrepresenting and also including anything that is explicitly against you. It's okay. You can include that, but just draft it in a way that it does not put my attention on that. It will come to it. It will eventually come to it. Never fear questions. Never fear grilling. But that's something for the oral argument. So let's come back to our moot drafting specifically. Then there's summary of arguments. Yes, it's self-explanatory. Your summary of arguments includes your issue ke andar. So what some kids do is within one thing we always do, I always ask my kiddos to do in summary of arguments, is that every issue, it a summary of arguments is made issue wise, issue 1 2, for example, majorly it's 4 issues, so 1 2 3 4. Within that, what some people tend to do is they just sort of mash up chat gpt pe dal ke, they mash up all the arguments and they like vomit one para of a summary of arguments. A, that does not look nice. B, that is not structured, so you might somewhere look like an indecisive person who's trying to just fit everything in. What we generally try to do is we put in the headings and add a conclusive line to all those. So for example, within issue 1 we have A B C D, and then within A B C D we have A.1 A.2. So don't go to the extent of A.1 A.2 writing A.1 A.2 in your paragraph, but mentioning it in a way that issue 1, our arguments are that A bracket blah 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 blah, B bracket blah blah blah, C D, and thus conclusively proving or conclusively identifying one line which sort of ties in all of your arguments together. So issue 1, for one issue the summary of argument should not be more than maybe 6 to 7 lines. So yes, more than 7 lines, it's just an essay, so don't do that. Post that, yeah, to the most coveted section of the meat of a memorial. Obviously, it contains headings, bulletin should be uniform, staircase method, yeah, that I'll teach you. Now, as I said, this entire session is structured into research is done, first draft and a second draft or a final draft. That depends. So the first draft, as I said, begins by identifying a skeleton. And that skeleton has to fit in through the ingredients that you talked about, that we talked about in the beginning. If it's a crime, there are ingredients to it. If it's an omission, there's always again ingredients. There's always ingredients to it. So the structure is always your headings, any exception, any exceptional fact, any exceptional circumstance that overrides the ingredients, and then an inarguendo if it exists. An inarguendo is essentially a safety clause. I don't know, sunset. I'm not sure if I should call it a sunset clause. No, that doesn't make sense. So it's a safety clause, safety clause where you guys can be thinking about it in a way that, okay, sometimes it happens is mera first and second, my primary arguments are guarded by the judge. Now what do? I should be having something to lay back on that, okay, Your Honor, if this does not work out and you're not also agreeing to these facts of mine, I have something else to fall back on. In arguendo, even if this guy was not defamatory, going back to the previous example, he still did this. Some argument always exists in that favor. It is not always necessary to have an inarguendo. It is majorly good to have one when it comes to big issues and issues where you know that you are going to be grilled a lot. Either you're on the faulty side, or you know that there are multiple layers to it and some layers the court might reject. So for those layered sort of issues, you can always have an inargument. Yes. So now going ahead, what are we talking about? One thing I go about saying is that even for research and also for drafting, always every mood majorly has a strong and a weak set. If it's a very balanced mood, in my life, I have never seen an extremely balanced mood prop. We would call it balanced if at least all the issues have equal sort of weightage and fault for both the parties, which rarely happens. Majority of the times, one or the other issue is so lopsided that the other party is crushed as to not even finding relevant judgments or relevant principles that support your client's wrongdoing. So how do you go about it is, after reading the initial reading of the mood prop, you start understanding that this side is going to be tough, at least for this issue. Always start drafting from the side that is tougher to argue from, because that helps you to sort of not have that writer's halt that I was talking about. Because if you sort of have a flow in the harder side, the easier side is relatively, nevertheless, it's easier to cope with, it's easier to do with. So always start with the harder side so that you start already having questions for the easier side. Otherwise, you go into this comfort zone where you can't come out, and you also can't think of questions. You generally, whilst drafting a memorial, you keep thinking of counter questions, right? Now, counter questions in and of itself is a separate uh, thing that exists. Many of my kids are come here confused कि दीदी petitioner के side से तो but ये भी तो पूछ सकते हैं, and petitioner की side से ये वाला argument भी तो आएगा, क्या हम cover कर लें. So a great thing is, yes, do cover all of it, but also understand one thing कि जो petitioner होता है, claimant होता है, I'm sorry, I'm using Hindi in between. I'm assuming everyone knows Hindi.